we learned that firms want to be minimizing their costs as much as possible, but when they increase their output, they can be in a range where their costs increase, decrease, or remain the same. And that's exactly where we get into the term known as scale. So there's economies of scale, diseconomies of scale, and constant returns to scale. So what exactly happens to a firm's cost when its output increases? Let's tackle the first one with economies of scale right here. It tells us that when a firm's output increases, its long-run average total costs are tending to fall. And this is exactly a range where firms would like to be operating in, so that is where they're going to see firms going to expand very, very rapidly. Economies of scale can result from specialization of labor and management, better use of capital, and complementary production techniques. And all of these tie together, basically saying that, hey, we're being very, very efficient in our production methods. Everything is working well with one another. We have synergy. We're learning from doing. And that these are all techniques that can essentially lower the cost for the firm as it expands. And what type of companies nowadays do you think are going to be experiencing these economies of scale, where one of the best examples that we can think about is going to be IKEA. They're huge department stores of furniture and housing furnishings. Basically, you get lost every time you go into one of them. How many IKEA stores do you think there are in the entire United States? You might think it's going to be a large amount, but in reality, there's only about 50 IKEA stores in the US. 5 of them here are in Florida. So 10% of all IKEA stores in the US are in Florida. And this just gives to the idea that we should be seeing IKEA expanding their store and their territories very, very rapidly because they are operating in this economies of scale region. As they increase their output, as they expand their businesses, as they build more and more stores, they should see their long-run average total cost falling, essentially because they are one of the major distributors of furniture and furnishings, and they are able to take advantage of all these complementary production techniques and also technology as well. Another range where firms might be operating at is going to be something known as constant returns to scale. So here we have constant returns to scale. And what do you think is going to happen with constant returns to scale? Well, if production increases, the costs are essentially going to be relatively constant, like the name implies. So a range of output where ATC are relatively constant, where ATC, the average total cost, is relatively constant. So when we increase output, when we have more production, our ATC curve is going to remain the same or stay constant. And what firms and businesses do you believe are operating under these constant returns to scale? I'll give you a few examples right here. And a few examples is, what do you see on every single street corner here in Miami or basically any other city? You typically see a lot of gas stations. So gas stations are one of the best examples of a firm or corporation operating under these constant returns to scale. The more and more gasoline and other products that they sell at that station, their costs are essentially going to remain the same or not change too much at all. We also see fast food franchises, so Burger King, McDonald's, you name them, they're also operating under these constant returns to scale. And we also see a lot of pharmacies as well. So CVS, Walgreens, Navarro's, if you go there, so Navarro. Basically, we see that a lot of these firms and corporations, as they increase their production, their costs are relatively the same, and the cost to replicate each one of these businesses is going to remain steady. So we can basically say cost to replicate is steady. And with all of this, we do notice that we see a lot of these firms and businesses on the intersections of a lot of streets within a lot of cities. And this is also a range of output where firms and corporations wouldn't mind operating at, because it just says that, hey, my costs are constant, so let's keep on expanding. We're not seeing increases in our costs, so we're perfectly fine in this region as well. The final region is going to be something that firms would like to avoid, and that's where we see diseconomies of scale. When firms increase their output or production, they're going to eventually encounter diseconomies of scale where their average total costs are going to increase. So increased production, their costs go up. And this can be due to a lot of variety of reasons. Increased bureaucracy and management, increased cost of scarce resources when they consider production, and also increasingly difficult terrain or rising operational costs, so more and more competition. So what firms and businesses do you think are operating in diseconomies of scale right now? You could go ahead and argue that Netflix might be operating in diseconomies of scale. When they have to go ahead and produce new shows, they have to go ahead and get new shows to put on their streaming service, they have to pay tons and tons, billions and billions of dollars just to make sure that they have enough programming to make the subscribers happy. They're also dealing with a lot of competition with Hulu, with Amazon Prime. They're dealing with all the sort of network television shows, sort of operating their own streaming services as well. So there's HBO, there's the Peacock, there's Disney Plus nowadays. So there's just a lot more competition, which is causing Netflix to have increased costs, and they're going to be operating in the diseconomies of scale region. Another example comes from the past, and if you can believe it, Apple was also going to be operating in the diseconomies of scale region back in the 80s. So back in the 80s, Apple was a very, very bad company. It was overtaken by Dell and HP in the computer business, and there was really no way out for Apple to sort of become great again, So what did they have to do? They had to go ahead and change everything within their management. They kicked Steve Jobs out. They brought him back in later on. And with this reorganization within the company and sort of developing themselves as a sort of unique sort of product, having a unique product, sleek design, all that idea, that allowed them to sort of restructure themselves and brand themselves as a company that they are nowadays, where they are in a very, very strong position financially. So what does the long-run average total cost curve look like under these three regions? It's going to take a U-shape, and we notice exactly what's going to be happening in each of these regions. We have the cost on the vertical axis and the output on the horizontal axis. So from this point, from the start of the ATC curve, that long-run average total cost curve, all the way to this point, what region are we operating in? As we increase our output, what happens to our costs? Our average total costs are falling, so therefore we're operating in the economies of scale region. As we go from Q0 to Q1, as we increase our output, our costs are remaining constant, so therefore we are operating in the constant returns to scale region. And then finally, once we pass Q1, our costs are going to increase, so therefore we're operating in the diseconomies of scale region. And like we said before, firms really don't mind if they're operating in the economies of scale or constant returns to scale region, and that's where they're going to see themselves expanding and basically having more output. They would like to avoid, however, the diseconomies of scale region because that's where they see their cost increasing. One further note is we do want to go ahead and see what's going to shift the long-run average total cost curve. So what can exactly change the shape of this particular curve right here? And the best way to answer this is, of course, going to be with technology. So technology plays a very, very huge role in altering the shape of our LRATC curve. It enhances production techniques, it improves global communications, and it provides computing power for easier expansion in economies of scale. And this allows firms to get humongous and extremely large before their costs actually increase. So what does technology actually do to our LRATC? We see it as such. So role of technology. And this is going to be a very, very important thing for a lot of firms to start investing in if they want to continue to operate in the economies and constant returns to scale regions. So suppose we have something along the lines of this. We have the cost, and then we have output right here. So output. So that's a O right there, not a Q. So output. And before we had our LRATC looking something like this. So we can say LRATC 0. So if firms are able to exploit technology for their own purposes and put it to its best efficient use, we notice that our LRATC is going to essentially expand outwards. So we have an extension of the LRATC, and we go from LRATC 0 to something like LRATC 1 in this instance. And what does this do? It extends the range of where we're operating at constant returns to scale. Before, we only had this blue part, but now with this extension of the green part right here, we notice that firms can continue to be profitable or have some type of decent profits because their costs are going to be staying constant as they expand outwards. So technology plays a very important role because it allows firms to become huge, before and expand, which keeps their costs constant. So keeping costs constant. And we notice that an example of this is going to be Walmart. So we notice that there are a lot of Walmarts nowadays, but they have successfully exploited technology, made it as efficient as possible for their business operations, and they are going to continue to operate under the constant returns to scale region because technology allows them to do so. There is one more further way where firms can actually decrease their costs, and that's going to be something that is related to scales, which is known as economies of scope. So we'll talk about that in the next video.